What's up, everybody? This is another edition of Best Ball in 15. After a bit of a hiatus for the puppies and the poodles, we're hopping back in the Best Ball Mania 4 streets. You're watching The Climb. All right, we'll jump right in here. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, I am in the back half of the draft once again, getting really comfortable at drafting from the 10, 11, 12 spot because I spend so much time here. But anyway, neither here nor there. We'll be talking through some of the current ADP landscape changes that you got to think through for Best Ball Mania. Certainly a bit of a mindset shift going back to Best Ball Mania from a short time window contest like a puppy or a poodle. So when I came up on the clock here for my first round pick, had a pretty strong run of wide receivers going in this draft. So there was basically a tier left of Wilson, Devontae Adams, Amon-Ra, or Jalen Waddle. And while I didn't necessarily think it was likely, there was at least a chance that I could have gotten completely locked out at wide receiver if the two drafters at the turn decided to take them all. So I did grab Garrett Wilson in the first round. Second round pick, I was deciding between Jalen Waddle, Nick Chubb, or Amon-Ra. Chubb would have given some week 17 correlation with Garrett Wilson. I ultimately took Waddle, and I kind of felt some buyer's remorse almost immediately taking him over Amon-Ra, who's a clear-cut number one in the offense. Waddle, extremely efficient last year, which is great, but also opens the door to a little bit of regression there. So, that's one thing that maybe I would change in this draft. I think maybe the biggest thing to be aware of if you're drafting Best Ball Mania right now is that the quarterback ADPs have been falling. So it's to the point now where I basically will not take a quarterback in the second round because I know there's a lot of teams out there in this contest who are getting quarterbacks into the third round. Back up on the clock here. Would have loved to have Breece Hall fall to me. Ultimately, it didn't happen. So took Amari Cooper to keep adding to the wide receiver core here and get a little bit of week 17 correlation with Garrett Wilson. Was considering Lamar with my third round pick, but got lucky enough that he fell to me here. I'm happy to take Lamar even without Andrews as early as the mid-third round. So absolutely smashing him here in the fourth round. One thing I did want to talk about with the quarterback stuff, I thought Scam Newton here at the 5 spot had a nice start. He went Stephon Diggs and Devonta Smith, basically giving himself 2 outs to having either Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts fall to him in the third round. Unfortunately, it didn't work out in this case, but I like that strategy quite a bit. And I do think, too, talking through, taking quarterbacks in the second round, the only time that I would advocate for it is if you want a specific player in the third round that you're not going to be able to get if you take a quarterback there. So for my picks here at the 5-6 turn, considered Kittle versus J.K. Dobbins. Ultimately went with George Kittle. I like having an elite tight end, and he pairs nicely with Lamar for week 16. Which I think we need to keep in mind for the Best Ball Mania, given how hard it is to advance during the playoff weeks. And had Dobbins fall back to me here, could have gone wide receiver. And, after taking 3 straight detours from wide receiver, I was starting to feel a little bit thin, despite starting with 3 straight wide receivers. So really hoping that I get the Baltimore wide receivers to fall to me here at the 7-8 turn. Otherwise, I'm going to be locked out. But finishing that thought on the quarterbacks, what I mean by getting a unique player start is basically if you take Diggs in the first and then Josh Allen in the second, now you can get Ramondre in the third. That's a nice setup for week 17. That's really the only instance when I would still consider taking a quarterback in the second round. Otherwise, I think you need to let them fall to the third. So both the Baltimore wide receivers still on the clock here. Almost took Bateman first, but I think given the recent injury news, I actually switched my pick to Zay Flowers and hoped that the people around me would be scared off of Bateman by that injury stuff. Also starting to feel a little bit thin at running back, considering Dobbins in the 6th was my first pick. So contemplated James Conner or David Montgomery, but ultimately the Lamar double was too good to pass up here. With those elite quarterbacks, I do think they are a really good pick in the 3rd round. It doesn't seem like a huge shift between a 2nd to a 3rd, but the opportunity cost, specifically at wide receiver, is pretty steep between the 2nd and 3rd round. And especially for me, since I've been so heavy on guys like Pollard and Ramondre to this point, I'm happy to start backing off on those players to take more of the quarterbacks. So at this point in the draft, starting to think through my 2nd quarterback, I did really want a Washington running back at this point in the draft, and I was a little bit surprised to see Gibson go at pick 100. So, debating taking Tua here to stack with Waddle, but looking at the guys at the turn, I didn't see, they both had quarterbacks already. They didn't have any Miami players. So I took Brian Robinson, was going to push Tua around the turn. And you know what? If somebody at the turn wants to take an unstacked Tua, I'll let them, and I'll figure out quarterback 2 later. And that's ultimately what happened here. I don't get why you would take Tua unstacked at that point. But moving on to the next pick, deciding between Charbonnet, who in a vacuum, I like him more than Brian Robinson, and then Aaron Rodgers. Ultimately took Charbonnet, hoping that Rodgers would get back to me. So the team right now is Lamar, Dobbins, Brian Robinson, Charbonnet, and then Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Amari Cooper, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and at tight end, George Kittle. So Rodgers making it back to me at this point would have been a really nice start, but I did see this guy take Lazard in the mid-10th and kind of figured that Rodgers was going to be coming off the board there. So starting to think through quarterback 2 options, and Rodgers did indeed come off the board there. Definitely wanted to get Eli Mitchell here. He's a running back I really like taking, and again, helps me build out my bet on San Francisco a little bit. And then I queued up Nico Collins, wide receiver I really like. Seems like we've had some DeAndre Hopkins buzz to New England lately, which I would very much appreciate because I have quite a bit of Nico Collins and I don't want to see those shares destroyed. Interesting, though, with Khalil Herbert falling almost a round past ADP, made it a bit of a tough decision, especially since I am probably looking at a 6 running back build for this team. But ultimately took Nico just to make sure that I have a quarterback 2 option and I'm not scrambling at the end of this draft. I actually think DeAndre Hopkins to New England is a pretty interesting landing spot. One, because I don't have a lot of, guys like Juju Smith-Schuster or the other New England receiving options. But also, I think it'll keep DeAndre Hopkins' price low. I don't think the market likes New England as a landing spot very much, and I'd be more than happy to continue taking D-Hop as a early to mid 4th round pick if he ends up in New England. So coming back on the clock here, definitely thinking through additional running back options or quarterback options. With where I'm at wide receiver, probably only going to be taking 7 or 8. So I need to be pretty targeted with how I spend my last wide receiver bullets. Ultimately, I kind of got a little bit skittish on where I was at with my quarterback 2 after seeing Jordan Love come off the board. So I took Higbee in hopes of Stafford falling to me, and then I'd be able to take a Giants wide receiver late to build up some Week 17 game stacks there. So I did get Stafford, so finished up my quarterback room, probably done at tight end, but could consider going 3 tight ends, just considering how strong tight end feels in the 18th round right now compared to some of the other positions. So also at this point, I had my eyes on Tajay Spears just because I do have pieces from both Houston and Seattle, which makes up the entire Tennessee Week 17 schedule. And it fits the build I'm going for too, because I need another running back right now. And of course, it seems like anytime I have my eye on Tajay, he comes off 1 or 2 picks before. Mostert fell quite a bit in this draft. I actually still prefer Jeff Wilson to Mostert, especially with the Dalvin Cook rumors to Miami. So I was actually happy to see Mostert come off the board just so I didn't have to decide between the two, and I could take Jeff Wilson. So Isaiah Hodgins on the board here. I could take him as a Giants wide receiver, but I figured Slayton and Paris Campbell were both available later. So between Chuba and Gainwell, I've been taking quite a bit of Chuba to this point. And with the Rashad Penny cut rumors, I think Gainwell is going to start to rise. So happy to keep adding to my shares there. So the team right now, Lamar, Stafford, Dobbins, Brian Robinson, Zach Charbonnet, Eli Mitchell, Jeff Wilson, Kenneth Gainwell. At wide receiver, Garrett Wilson, Waddle, Cooper, Zay Flowers, Bateman, Nico, and at tight end, George Kittle, Tyler Higbee. So I didn't even realize it until I was coming back around for these last 2 picks. Paris Campbell actually came off the board in the 14th round. Don't think I ever see that, but I was definitely at this point sweating out whether or not Darius Slayton was going to make it back to me. Otherwise, I'd be looking at a guy like Sterling Shepard, who I like, but I'm not confident that he stays on the field. I did consider a third tight end. Normally, I don't do that when I take an elite tight end, but I actually think it's viable at this time in the draft season, just because we have a lot of ambiguity right now around some of these backup running back situations that I think training camp will provide some clarity on. So later in the drafting season, I'll be more willing to take running backs at this part of the draft. But I think the late round tight ends offer a pretty good projection right now compared to the other guys. So had a couple wide receivers I considered. Ultimately went with Puka Nacua, a rookie wide receiver on the Rams, to add to my Stafford bet. So I'll jump into a lineup review here in a second. You see the final team there on the left as well. But I do think, I kind of made a mistake getting too scared and taking Stafford when I had myself set up for CJ Stroud or Brock Purdy later in the draft. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into our lineup review. All right, so got the whole lineup here on screen. We'll do another lineup review. Obviously got both quarterbacks stacked and game stacked. Always want to see that with my lineups. In terms of roster construction, another 2-6-8-2 build for me with an elite quarterback and elite tight end. If you've watched my videos to this point, you'll probably start picking up on the fact that this is a pretty common build for me. I like to take what the draft room gives me, and this is the comfort zone that I usually find myself falling into. So I need to do a better job in some of these videos of kind of getting out of that comfort zone a little bit. But in this case, I didn't really see a need to with what the room gave me. Obviously, I talked about it in my last Best Ball in 15, but the 2-6-8-2 is a roster construction that performed over expectation in all 3 of the previous Best Ball Manias. I don't think by any means that you always have to use a roster construction that is, on this list. In fact, I think there are advantages to getting unique and away from these. But I think if you are deviating from these roster constructions, you should be doing so in an intentional way. So other aspects of the roster construction, I did have 5 wide receivers through round 9 and 4 running backs through round 13. So definitely happy to see that. I think in most cases this year, I want to have 5 wide receivers through round 8 because things do start to fall off after that point. And I'm certainly not going to force a 5th wide receiver once we hit that cliff. If I miss out on a 5th, then I'll just go forward with 4 and try to adjust after then. ADP value, nothing crazy here. Zay Flowers, the only quote-unquote reach, but it made sense to get the Lamar double stack. Did get a couple decent values on running backs, which is always nice to see when I am doing one of these later running back builds. In terms of the playoff stacks, I think I wound up stacking pretty well for every week of the playoffs. And most importantly, I think I did so without necessarily forcing it, making any reaches or decisions that would put me in a bad position structurally. So a lot of these won't hit. Most of them probably won't hit. But I think it's about giving yourself as many outs as possible to having one of these games go off, and then that eventually, vaulting your lineup through to get to the finals and then having a chance once you get there. One thing I want to do a better job of with these videos is not just patting myself on the back, but actually thinking through, where I went wrong and what I changed. And in this case, I think the answer was pretty obvious. I got a little bit too skittish on my quarterback 2. I should not have forced Stafford there. Pretty weak Rams stack and a weak Giants bring back as well. I mean, it's fine, but when you add in the fact that I had set myself up to get CJ Stroud later, as well as the fact that I didn't even think about Brock Purdy, but both of those guys I could have pushed to see if one of them got back to me for the 15-16 turn in this draft and gotten a better running back or wide receiver when I took Stafford and Higbee. So I think that was a pretty big mistake for this lineup, and now we just have to hope it wasn't a $3 million mistake. But that's all I got for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing more Best Ball 15 videos all summer long, as well as draft live streams. We're going to start having more guests on for these Best Ball in 15 videos, so really excited for that. Definitely stay tuned for more. Thanks for watching. I'm Alex, and this has been another episode of The Climb.